Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's really wonderful to see you all here. And I know it's 12 o'clock on a Wednesday, so before we dive in, if we can just take a deep breath together. And as usual, I noticed that when I was taking a deep breath, I felt joy running into my fingertips, and I'm so glad to share this moment with you all. So welcome to Centering Justice. I was reflecting this morning on how it's been almost a year since we started this program. And many of you have been with us from the very beginning of that journey. And I think the thing that feels really present to share with you today is something that my colleague Will Jones said. So I'm going to quote Will and say that centering justice is a movement. And what that means to me, or the question that sparks, is what are we moving toward? And when we bring these speakers here today, we are really asking for their guidance and wisdom and the richness of their experiences to guide us toward a vision of the future that centers justice, where we have new ways of being together and being alive and feeling our humanness together. And when I think about the centering justice experience, for me, it does come back to those tingles that I feel in my body and that I can sense in each of your faces on the screen, and that we feel in this space together. And the gentle invitation I want to offer you in this session, the title of which is Love as the Movement, is to think about your experience in this space today as love, and to consider centering justice as a movement in love. So we're really delighted to have our three speakers, Germaine Smith, Ebony Robinson, and Charo Ledon. And I'm going to turn things over to Yodit to guide us into this session.
Thanks, Ananya. Welcome, everyone. It's Audre Lorde that reminds us, I'll put her quote in the chat, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. It might allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but never enable us to bring genuine change. And so when we were conceiving of and trying to listen for what this month's session would be focused on, we have the fullness, the hugeness of honoring Black history in this country, which can never fit neatly into 28 days. We also, in the West, celebrate Valentine's Day, which can be so transactional and reduce love to, some roses or some chocolate or a card. And I don't have a boo right now, so if anybody wants to send me some roses, chocolate, or a card, I'll take it. But today, I was thinking about Ananya and Will and I about agape love. What would it mean to center our work in agape love? And for those of you for whom that might not be a familiar term, you can find it in lots of places. It has Greek roots. I learned about it in church and in the New Testament. And agape love is not about emotions or feelings, but of the will and of choice. Um, it's the type of love that could be defined as the steady intention of the will to another's highest good. The steady intention of the will to another's highest good. In fact, in my faith, we're reminded in 1 John 4:19, we love because the Creator first loved us. This love, agape love, is characterized by unselfishness and giving, even to the point of sacrifice. It's unconditional love that doesn't judge based on performance. It's a type of love that is a huge gift, a blessing, really, but that so many have not grown up receiving. It's like saying, you are my beloved, and I am pleased with you. And it's pleased instead of pride, because pride is about accomplishment. We're never, those of us on this Zoom, are not going to see the vision that we're creating now. We're building this for our children's grandchildren. So we're not trying to get to an end here. We're trying to fertilize the ground, and in acknowledging we are pleased with one another to see our humanity. And that's what I see in the three guests we have today. And I want to just briefly share three things with you about each of them. So one, some of you may know Charo Ledon, who has been a leader in our community for a really, really long time, and an organizer in the Latinx community. And specifically, I met her when she was doing some work following the community needs health assessment. And Charo shared with me that she'd been going door to door in communities where folks were undocumented or non-English speakers, and having these really important conversations about health and about the chronic illnesses that many people of color experience. And of course, we heard about that a lot this year with COVID, right? But Charo could bring to that conversation a cultural norm about second servings. And I really appreciated when Charo shared the story, because my family's from Ethiopia, and taking the second serving is really a food that is an expression of gratitude, and it's a signal of abundance because so many of our communities have gone without. So when you have that second serving, it's like saying, thank you, to the cook that made it, typically our abuelas or our grandmothers, to the farmers who prepared it, to those who were those who tilled the land, etc. And when she shared that story of sitting with folks and talking about how we didn't have to take the second serving, that there had been that we have more tools in our toolbox to express our gratitude to our elders and to our families, right? I'd always, the backstory is Charo's been my friend for a really long time because she ran a travel agency in town. But I fell more deeply in love with Charo when she shared that story. Like sitting in the fullness of that, of helping someone to understand how our identities, our stories, and our connections to our histories can evolve is agape love to me. And similarly, Ebony Robinson, who's with us, who I met through her work at United Way, but she is a faith leader in her own right. She and her husband pastor Reach Church in town. Ebony really exemplifies that agape love, and she's been a model in the community, in the faith community. And I don't know that we can talk about love without talking about believing in something greater than us, whatever that is, stars, trees, God, the whole gamut, right? And finally, Germaine, who I've also had a chance to organize and do activism work, but she's at the Dispute Resolution Center with my girl and a former Centering Justice speaker, Belinda Doolin. And restorative justice, in the roots of it, the work that the DRC does is love, is agape love, and is a new way of imagining our futures. So I'm gonna pull back here because I want you to have an opportunity to meet these amazing people. I'm so grateful that y'all would participate. And Ananya, thanks again for organizing what will be a really powerful session.
Thank you, Yodit. So as always, we really want to invite our speakers to bring their whole selves into this space. And so we'll begin by asking each of you what communities and identities you're drawing upon as you enter this space. And Ebony, if it's okay, we'll start with you.
Yeah, of course. Before I get started, thank you to Yodit and Ananya and the new team. I'm excited to be here, and what I'm drawing and who I'm bringing with me as I'm part of this conversation, and who am I identifying as. I'm a Black woman. I'm a work in progress. I'm the daughter of Belinda and Arthur Jackson, the granddaughter of Ollie and Mary and James and Belle, the sister of Anthony, the wife of Jason. I'm a mother of Naima, Tahira, Solomon, and Sanaa. I'm a mentor, a coach, and author of the God Print, Navigating Life His Way. I'm drenched in melanin. I'm rooted in love, grounded in Christ. I'm a walker of faith, a driver of purpose. I'm a lover of people, agape love. I love people. I'm a steward of legacy, and I'm a finer woman. And that's who I'm bringing with me today. And I'm excited to share and to learn from each and every one of you.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Germaine?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And again, I would like to thank Yodit and Ananya for thinking of me and inviting me into the space today. I do have to share, when I got the email from Ananya, I was like, oh my, I was so touched that she thought of me to share my experiences and be with you all today. So very grateful, humbled, honored to be with all of these amazing women here today to talk about our experiences. And of course, the amazing folks in our audience. I see a lot of really familiar faces. So that really comforts me, because I'm a little bit nervous. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not an extrovert by nature. So talking about myself is a little bit foreign sometimes. But yeah, so I guess I kind of told you I'm an introvert, so I'm bringing that a little bit with me, but I'm working on that, trying to expand and grow and evolve. And I am a second generation Korean American on my mom's side, and then my father's side is Caucasian. Interestingly, I just had a genetic testing. So I've been thinking a lot about different identities and different cultures. While I grew up in a very strong Korean household of multi-generations, cousins and aunts and uncles. I think one of my cousins is on this call, by the way. Hi, Heather. Thanks for being here and supporting me. We grew up together, and we're like sisters, because I don't have a blood sister, so she's kind of like my blood sister. But yeah, so I've just really been thinking about those different identities as well, and found out there's some Turkish background, which was not expected. I think what else? Some Greek background, some Tibetan background. So it's really expanding, kind of like really who I am. I'm still evolving. So I just pull a lot from that, and I'm really grateful for such a rich cultural history and background, and I'm super excited to explore more. about that in the future. But yeah, and then, of course, I've been in a lot of justice movements. I think some folks probably know me here through food justice and food sovereignty and food access work. Probably also through some racial justice activism through ICPJ, which is the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice. And then also, and then of course in the restorative justice movement with the Dispute Resolution Center, all of course grounded and rooted in love and taking care and nourishing one another and our communities. Yeah, so I'm sure I'm missing a lot of other things that I'm bringing into the space today, but I'll add there and I'll let Charo continue.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy and nervous to be here. I'm excited that I was invited. It was like, oh wow, they want to hear from me. That's cool. Like Germaine, I'm an introvert, so it's speaking in front of a bunch of people is sort of unnerving. But I have you on speaker mode, so I only see a couple, so that helps. I'm Cuban American, first generation, and I often represent the Latino community. That's a little bit hard to do because the Latino community is so diverse. There's 21 countries that speak Spanish, and just as many different types of foods and tribes and races, and you name it. It's just a big, like, you shake it up and it's who knows what you have in there. I'm a mom and a grandma, and I have lots of friends, and I guess because I am sort of an introvert, I keep sort of under wraps what it is I do, and I don't really sort of put out there who I am to many people. But here I am. You're pushing the envelope for me. But I'm really passionate about helping people and empowering them and helping them navigate whatever it is they're trying to do. Whether it's reading a letter they just got in the mail they can't read, to getting their bills paid, or, I mean, you name it. It's really all very rewarding.
Thank you, Charo. And it's so beautiful to see everyone in the chat really sending their love to you. And yeah, so thank you for introducing yourself. So we're going to move into our core conversation for today. And Ebony, Charo, and Germaine, I invite you to just riff off of each other if you feel it. So the prompt we'll offer is, how is love shaping your vision of a just and thriving society? And maybe we could start with Ebony again.
Sure. Well, my Christian faith points me to the principle of, there's the greatest commandment, then there's a second commandment. So the greatest commandment is love God with all your heart, body, and soul. And then the second commandment says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so for me, how am I then how am I shaping that vision is that I then, as I'm viewing an individual, I'm viewing them in the lens of how I view myself. And if I have that love, that self-love, then when I view someone else, I see them as me. And how would I treat me is how then I need to treat someone else. And so that's how I am shaping my vision of a just society, is pointing back to those principles. And another thing that I shared with when we were having our previous conversations that I want to even just put here is that there's another scripture, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, that describes, it gives a description of what love is. And so it goes down and it says, love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous. And then for me, then I want to insert my name into love. And so instead of saying love is patient, then I'm asking the question, Ebony, are you patient? So Ebony is patient. Ebony is kind. Ebony is not jealous. She doesn't brag. She doesn't act disgracefully. And so as I'm looking at that principle and I'm putting myself in there, then that's how I am framing my perspective so that we can have a just and thriving society, is that I'm saying, do I view my community members as myself? Do I view my community members as loving me? And then I'm looking at that scripture and saying, Ebony, are you being kind? Like at the end of the day, and again, my faith is Christianity. If God will ask me at the end of the day, Ebony, did you really do 1 Corinthians 13? Like, did you really have that definition? And then if he points back to say, okay, Ebony, let's go down the list. Were you kind? Were you patient? Were you, not walking around being puffed up? And so that's, for me, is how I'm shaping my vision.
Wow.
Ebony, can you talk? That scripture also talks about suffering long.
Yeah. Yes. And we don't, it's tough, right? No one wants to suffer anyway. And then no one wants to suffer long. And I'll also kind of think of a scripture that, that long suffering means really without a pause, like there's no let up, that it continues, that it's, it doesn't stop. And so, as we think about that, and as I think about that scripture, and as I think about that in the community, is that I then, as I'm trying to form this just society, that I have to say, for me to get to that point, that I am willing to sacrifice. Now here's that, now you have that agape love, unconditional, is sacrificial, that I'm sacrificing so that, and then I'm suffering long, I'm without a let up, so that I can help my community get us to where we need to be. But yeah, that long suffering, again, I don't think, if I would ask if anybody on this line wants to suffer, no one would raise their hand. And then if I would ask the question, go ahead, Jody.
I'm sorry, I was gonna, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
I was thinking about, there's these graphics that show kind of the cycle of social movements. And you'll often see, as we did this summer, like the honeymoon, where we peak and everybody's in, and there's inertia, and we are protesting, and we're, out there, and we're writing our Congress folks, and we're sending our paychecks. And then that energy will wane, right? And you'll see yourself on the other side of it, which is actually why we started Centering Justice, because I saw that wane when we hit the pandemic with racial equity work, right? That all of the energy of 2019, and years prior had kind of come to a screeching halt because we were in pandemic crisis. And when you shared this with us during our planning, I was thinking, oh, does centering love in the movement give us the capacity for the long suffering? Because our bodies can only sustain so much of the fight.
Yeah.
Of the throwing our bodies in the movement, not to mention our traumas and our core being. You got me thinking about, if we are committing to long suffering together, then you're also sharing my burden.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, it's a scripture that reminds me, and it's talking about in the context of gifts, but talking about how we are connected, and how every joint supplies, and how it's important for us to be connected, because I'm able to feed off of everyone else, right? I'm feeding off of the hand who I'm holding. And so what that does, that connection, it allows us to walk strategically. So you talk about that long suffering, how we're able to get through what we're doing together. And so, as we're in the fight, and as we're looking for a just community, just as an example, Ananya, Charo, Germaine, Yodit, and I were walking hand in hand. And then Yodit then can then go, and she sees a problem. She sees what is happening. She can then kind of break that hand and keep walking. And then Germaine kind of steps up, and then Germaine can see something. She then goes, tackles that problem, and then she can come back beside us. And that's where she gets that breath. So then that she won't, burn out, she won't wane, and that we're doing it together, but we have to be strategic. And that's why it's so important for us to be connected to people. We can't do this alone, right? Like, in my faith, we say there's no Lone Ranger Christians, because you can't do life by yourself. And so then as we are in this fight of justice, we can't do it by ourselves. As much as we want to, we all have great ideas. We're all super awesome and magic, but we also have other folks that are in the fight. I need Germaine, I need Charo, I need Yodit, I need all these individuals, so that when I do need to kind of take a breath, that the movement doesn't stop. And that's why we need to be strategic as we're walking together, and we're walking together so that we're connected.
Yeah, Ebony, and I wonder, Germaine or Charo, what's this bringing up for you?
Yeah, I love what you just explained, Ebony. I can like totally visualize, when you spoke about this in our last session, I could just totally visualize, like, okay, we lift Yodit up, right? And she does her thing, and then we're walking behind her hand in hand, making sure that she's got that safety net and that support, right? And then, when she needs to fall back, then I just love that this idea and this concept. And yeah, how do we do that? And I think, and I kind of want to go backwards just a little bit to touch on our conversations on suffering, right? And it's, it's been hard. It's not been easy, right? With the self-care and the self-love and the self-worthiness and the self-value. Those are definitely hurdles I still struggle with today, and maybe I will, for the rest of my life. But but as a woman of color, I think, yeah, it's been hard. It's, we've really had to overcome a lot to get where we are. And a lot of times it has felt in isolation, right? Like you're touching on here, Ebony, that, that's how we get burned out, is we do this alone. And we think, and I think sometimes too, we say, oh, she's got so much going on. She's a mother of 3, she, is taking care of her parents, lots of all kinds of things, where we don't want to burden others too. I think we come from that perspective as well. And so I think that kind of having that paradigm shift, and also not being, I've been thinking about this recently in the last probably few years, actually, like kind of getting away from that superwoman myth that I can do it all, I can have it all, I want to, that kind of thing. Like I can take care of the kids. Dinner's going to be ready at 5. I can achieve these 10 initiatives in the community. But well, I was trapped in that for a really, really long time. And I do see a lot of women of color, especially, and a lot of my friends and a lot of people that I've been in movement building work, and to me, that's just a myth, that superwoman myth. I mean, we have superpowers for sure, but the superwoman myth, I think we need to get out of as well, right? And kind of think about, we do need to lean on each other. We need each other. Like Ebony was saying, or maybe Yodit was saying, we don't get here and we don't get through this alone. We do it together. And so, yeah, so how do we become more strategic about it? And I guess maybe this is the start of that, to really think about how does that look? you know, I mean, I would say that restorative justice, the values and the principles, and the concepts behind restorative justice could be a part of that. Yeah, so I'll stop there and let Charo jump in, yeah, I'll come back later.
So I too have struggled with trying to do it all and doing so much that I got sick. You know, I had to back off because my body was demanding some attention. But it's like in everything in nature, there is an ebb and a flow and a season. And so, like, even the ocean, it crashes and then it recedes and it comes in and out. And we need to be able to use those cycles to push and then recede so somebody else can push and take turns. In that way, it could be perpetual instead of, you know, a movement that peaks and then it peters out. Because this is for the long haul. This is not gonna, the dreams that I have for just society isn't gonna happen, probably not in my lifetime. I mean, I only have so many years left in this lifetime, and maybe even in my own kid's lifetime. So we need to use the resources in a way that we can sustain for a long time, which requires teamwork, requires that we don't pretend that we're superhuman and can carry the whole load alone. We have to share. We have to share in the joys, and we have to share in the workload, and we have to share in the struggle and the suffering.
I see you doing, I mean, again, that was kind of the inspiration. And I love that, I think it's Kristen that put in the chat this idea of mutuality. So much of the work of unlearning internalized white supremacy and its characteristics is returning to our cultural roots, you know, returning to collectivism, you know, turning away from this idea that any of us could accomplish anything on our own. You know, there is not one thing I've achieved in my life on my own, you know. It took some support. So I'm thinking about that, Charo, like, how do we reach back? We had done, one of our sessions was on reimagining our roots, and like talking about the ways that we had Leslie Welch from Birth Detroit and the Black Mothers Equity Fund, you know, talking about the ways in which midwifing and the doula and doula work have been sort of co-opted, such that now the majority of doulas and midwives are white women and not women of color, when that was a practice, right, that had been introduced by Black and Brown cultures. And I think many of us have co-opted, this is that master's tools comment, right? We've co-opted the ways of being here and are trying to survive in them when they weren't made for us. Similarly, you know, in nonprofit work, so much of what we're doing is driven by, you know, boards that are comprised of people who come out of private industry, you know, organizational processes that we borrowed from the private sector or the public sector, right? So it's as this is why I don't believe we'll ever reform policing, right? We need to reimagine. So Charo, when we were planning, you know, something you said that really stuck with me was like, we're dreaming up something that hasn't happened. And we're like being magicians. Do you want to say any more about where you were with that and kind of how you're thinking about that in the context of this conversation?
Well, it's like to dream of a world that it's love-based and abundance-based in our current life requires great imagination and great faith that those big dreams can be real, can be manifested. And so, yeah, we're making magic, because magic to me is when you imagine something that doesn't exist yet and you manifest it. And so it's going to take imagination and magic and elbow grease, of course, to create a world that's love-based and abundance-based. And of course, we won't talk about the fear because we want it gone altogether, and that's running a lot of our world right now.
Yeah, Charo, I love how you bring that up about magic and how we may not see what we are envisioning. We may not see what we are, our boots to the ground at this moment. We may not see how the end result. And, that's why, what I was sharing earlier about me being a steward of legacy, like I just really believe that that's something that I need to do personally is steward, manage what was given to me. I think about another scripture in the Bible where it talks about how the master gave his workers these talents, and how they, when he came back, what did they do with these talents? And, one had buried it, another one had, so they had the same amount, one had did something with it and actually multiplied it. And that's where I see, me and hopefully us, that we're being good stewards over what we're trying to envision. Yes, the parable of the talents. Yes, Erica. And again, I'm just a firm believer of legacy. And, why am I rooted in love and grounded in that is because those 4 children that I talked about, I want to see, or at least give them, I can give them a good handoff. So, I ran track in college. And so, I ran the 4x1. And so, I see where, my ancestors, they were running with the baton, and then they passed it. And then it got to my great parents, and, all the way down to my parents, and now to me. And so the hope is each time that we run this race, that we're getting faster and we're getting more efficient, and we're able to not have those obstacles any longer, or those barriers, because every time we run the race, or our ancestors or those before us have been able to see something different. And so that's where I'm at, is that I hope that as I am, thinking about legacy, as I'm thinking about a just society, that I'm thinking about it in the view of, again, me loving my neighbor as I love myself, but also, what do I want my children to have access to? What do I want them, when I pass the baton, what do I want them to look like? In 10 years and 20 years, I think we should have visions for our community, for ourselves. Like, how do we truly envision, what does this look like? And then how do we run that race? And then when I pass the baton, I hope that I have add value to, that 100 meters or whatever I was running, that I was able to add value to it.
Bev, while you're off, and I'd love to hear from Germaine and Charo too, I'm just be honest, it's hard, it's real easy to love y'all and these folks on this Zoom meeting right here. It's harder for me to love, extend love, particularly agape love, how to white supremacists, for example. I'm gonna take a quick tangent and I'm gonna come back because I want us to talk about this too. I think the way that mainstream media frames much of what happens is so linear and so myopic that we miss nuance and complexity. So it took me a moment, but after I reflected, I was not at all shocked by the insurrection on January 6th. There were two things that really struck me. One is that the audacity to invade a building built by enslaved people, and then to have people of color clean up that mess. So I'm still mad about that. I'm mad that I saw our aunties and uncles cleaning up feces and urine, you know, from folks that would be so vitriolic. And still, I know trauma when I see it. And what we saw is the descendants of those who would terrorize, who would colonize, who would bring violence and harm, you know, from Europe onto these lands. And so there's a part of me that sees that trauma and sees the humanity of those folks in that trauma. But I can't, Germaine, Charo, I'm having a hard time moving from I see it, you know, I can name it, to I can extend love. Help a sister out. Help. Maybe we could, Germaine, maybe you, and then we'll bounce back. I want to make sure we get our voices in.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm there with you, Yodi. I'm not gonna lie. Like, even though in all the work that I do, and you know, and all the love that I put into it, I still hold a lot of anger, and I have to process. I've been processing this anger, right? I've been processing this injustices, right? It is hard. It is really, really hard. And, you know, I think, so I don't have any clear answers or anything like that, but I think that when, you know, so I'm gonna go back a little bit, and I see Belinda's here too, and she'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So there is a Indigenous practitioner named Edward Valandra, who so eloquently wrote in a book called Colorizing Restorative Justice, where the first harm of this country was taking the land, right? Taking the land from Indigenous tribal nations. And that's the first harm that has still not been reconciled, right? And of course, the second harm to our nation, right, and to our people, is the kidnapping and enslavement of Black people. So we have not reconciled two very, very big harms in this country, and I think that there really has to be a very deep conversation about these things. We somehow have to talk about this and come to some kind, and I think we talked about this in our previous sessions about how do you come to that understanding and to that ground. And I think, so I'll go back to restorative justice again. I think the values and the principles of that is to try to make that connection, that human connection, that understanding. And so the value, and so restorative justice, if folks don't know, is rooted in Indigenous, Native American, North American Indigenous practices, cultural practices. And I love this. I love this concept and this idea of taking care of one another. In that, you know, so in Indigenous practices of circles, you know, you have usually somebody who's committed a harm against another person who has been harmed. And of course, we want to support the person who's been harmed, the survivor of some kind of wrongdoing. But we forget that the person who's created the harm is also harming themselves, right? And an indigenous concept is, or belief is, that a piece of that spirit of that person flies away or is gone, or their spirit is broken, or maybe their spirit completely leaves and they're spiritless. And so coming back to circle is to have everybody in the community come together to help that person, to help both people, the survivor and the person who has been harmed, to regain that spirit, so that they're now made whole again, whole to who they authentically are. Not to, and we talked about this before, they're not restored to who they were, but they're hopefully restored to a wholeness of their, and I think Charo brought this up, of their essence, right? Of their true, and maybe in the image of God, right? Or whoever you believe. But and I think it's just, if we could function like that, as if we could be like that as a society, if we could have these practices more frequently, I think with each other, is I think also comes back to what Ebony was talking about, of not getting burned out, right? Holding somebody up and being supportive, right? And then when they get tired, they fall back, so it's kind of a reciprocal sort of a situation of we take care of each other. We don't let each other fail, right? We don't let each other stay broken. And and then the other idea too is that somehow the community has also failed that individual who's created the harm. So in indigenous communities take responsibility for, how have we not nourished, nurtured, and protected this young man or this young woman or whoever that might be? What have we done to fail them? And how can we make that right? And so I say this to say, Yodit, I really lean on that, right? I really try to lean on that, knowing and understanding and recognizing that we all have traumas, right? We all have traumas, but I've seen the power of these circles, and I know Belinda's in these circles a lot, and it's amazing to witness what happens when people, when that's the goal, is to nourish each other's spirits, right? Yeah, I guess I'll end there and I'll let Charo go.
So the incident of January 6th did not come as a surprise to me. Going back to the day in Charlotte, yeah, when those Charlottesville, yeah, I forgot the Ville. When these people were walking around saying, "You will not replace us," it's like there's this, again, lack. There's enough room for everybody. It's not about replacing anyone. It's not about hoarding. And if extra people come, they're going to take it away from us. So it's like this ingrained, inherited fear that somebody's going to take away what you stole from somebody else, to be true. So it's like there's an untangling. There's a guilt because somewhere in your DNA, one of your ancestors stole from somebody. It's like people who are worried about keeping their house locked and having all kinds of padlocks like my dad, it's because they steal. They steal themselves, so they have to keep everything locked because they think everyone else will steal from them. So if you go back in their ancestry, somebody stole land, or So children, they're afraid someone's going to steal from them. So it's like really old pain and fear. And how can we unravel that? It requires magic. It's going to take a long time. But to me, it's doable. And we have to start a little at a time, as much as our capacity will allow. But if we don't start, it'll continue forever. So we have to start. And we're doing it now with this. But it's like those people they have poison in their cells from many generations ago. And they need healing. I mean, we all do, but that's how I see it.
Come on, Ab, get in there.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. Charo, again, you always make us just want to run and cry because you're just so awesome. Germaine, you too. I think that, your going back to your question, like, how do we do that? And I think the word that is resonating with me is compassion, right? Compassion is recognizing the suffering of others. So how can I, as a Black woman, want to have a conversation with, or have the desire, or even it may even seem odd that as a Black woman to want to have a conversation with, a white man who, has these ideologies that I totally do not agree with, is because I'm recognizing that there is some suffering there. I'm recognizing that there is some trauma there, that there, again, it's on both sides. And so it's, for me, how do I overcome that by not necessarily looking at that person for how they are presenting, but again, it's going back to me loving my neighbor as myself, as tough as it may be, that I'm not necessarily looking at them, but I'm looking in them and realizing that they're coming with some stuff, right? We talked about before, the baggage. Like, I'm a bag lady because I have baggage that I have been carrying that has been, I talked about earlier, the baton. When the baton was passed, there also was some victories, but there also was some stuff that was passed along that came with me. So, when my mom gave birth to me, just because of what she had, she unintentionally also put a backpack on my back that it has allowed me to carry some stuff. And so, for me, as Charles says, it's like there's this misconception that for a person to get something that you're going to have to take it away from someone else. We all have a piece of the pie. We all have it. And so, it's then for us to be able to show and illuminate and highlight to people that for us to have a just society, that, it has to be rooted in love. And we also have to look at it in the sense of equity and fairness. And again, how can we do this together? But again, as tough as it is, but we have to me, look at it in the eyes of compassion and knowing that, I think Will put it in the chat earlier, hurt people hurt people. And I mean, it sucks, but how can we, try to get that understanding so that I want to, be able to work with you.
You had a Maya Angelou quote that I think I'd love to insert here. I've been holding it since you said it.
Yeah, love liberates, it does not bind, right? Love liberates, it does not bind. And so, we have to, get that. And, bind is, I'm being held by something. And, I can't move. I have these chains that is not allowing me to move and, come through this movement. But as we insert love, and as Yodit showed us or shared with us earlier, agape, meaning unconditional, sacrificial, then it's going to set all of us free, right? That's liberate, that's liberation. And I think as we go through this movement, we all have to understand that we all are bound to something. Something has us bound, and that we all need to be free in different areas, but that we all are not liberated. As much as we want to, move through life as if we are, there are pieces of us that are still bound. But if that love will liberate us, and it will set us all free. And once we're one free, we're all free. But I think at the point that we're at, we're all not free. So we can't really go into that mind frame and that movement. The movement, for us to continue it, we have to have that mindset of love liberating.
Charo, you had shared a beautiful image of abundance with us, and I wonder if you would share that now.
I cry all the time, so this is just a given. Like apple trees have oodles of apples, and there's apples on the ground rotting. And it's like there's enough apples for people, there's enough apples for the deer, there's enough apples for the ants and the worms and fertilizing the land. And it's abundance right there. Why are we so worried that if I grab an apple, somebody else is not going to get one? There's enough for everybody. We have to start being diligent to confront the subtle messages of lack. They're everywhere. Abundance is everywhere if we only open our eyes and negate the messages of lack.
Thank you for sharing that image, Charo. And Germaine, what is this sparking for you?
I remember when we talked about this, I can't remember if it was this week or last week. Time seems so relative lately. But I think, as a grower, beekeeper, previous farmer, and in that movement, and Charo talking about, and I think Ebony touched on, like Mother Nature and Earth provides, right, this abundance, and I also recognize that, there's such such uniqueness within nature too. So on that apple tree, every single apple is a little bit different, right? Every single leaf on that tree is a little bit different. And so just recognizing, the beauty in such, also in those imperfections of that apple tree, right? And the apple tree is flawed a little bit, right? And that apple tree is never going to be perfect. That apple tree is what it is supposed to be, and it is providing and is nourishing all types of living creatures and beings, right? And putting back into the soil, right? And that whole like life cycle, right? So of course my mind naturally goes to those things, right? And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, is how do we put that energy, like the tree, right? Puts the energy, the falling rotting apples, puts back into the soil, then it comes back up into this beautiful, genuine, unique, flawed tree, right? Unperfect tree. And I think that's kind of what we're speaking of right now within each other. How do we do that for each other? That's kind of what this is eliciting in my mind, right? That sort of this ecosystem of just continually trying to nourish and re-nourish and energize us. And I think that's really, pointing back to earlier in our conversation, doing, like, how do we do that? We have to do that. There's really no other way. Yeah.
And that's a really beautiful place to wrap up this part of our conversation. And we're going to shift right now into asks, invitations, and demands. So if you've been at Centering Justice before, you know that we like to wrap up the conversation part of this session with a chance for each of our speakers to share an ask, demand, or invitation for our community for how we can center racial justice now and into the future. So I'll invite you to share as you feel moved.
Yeah, sure. I'll start us off. For me, I think there's 5 things that I want to challenge and invite us to do. I would say number 1 is to use our talents to drive change. I think that we all have something, and that we have to recognize, those talents and use those talents in a way that can help in the movement. So if you're a great writer, so then write a newsletter. Use your talents that you have to drive change. I think, as our white friends, is to educate yourself and not require Black and brown people to inform you, because that even can be challenging for Black and brown folks. I would say to amplify and promote underrepresented voices. So if while you're in those spaces, to allow for those folks to kind of come up. I would even say advocate for creating cultural exchanges in our children's schools. So it's not just about certain cultures and races, but there needs to be some type of an exchange so that our children are aware early on, and that they're learning to appreciate and love as babies. And I think the last one is to advocate for your employer to adopt or add, edit DEI practices in the workplace. Really stand up for that, because I think that's going to be important for us moving forward.
Thank you, Ebony. Yeah, go ahead, Charo.
Those are all really good points you make, Ebony. To ask employers to put their muscles where their mouths are, because a lot of times they have all these policies, but they're just words on a page. I want to see action that moves the needle, because words on a page don't move the needle. I would like each and every person to work on themselves, to find their essence and allow more of it and more of it to manifest, because that really is a powerful thing. And if you are in your essence, you're able to see things so much more clearly, and you be able to call out things that aren't right with more authority, because from inside you. It's not like somebody told you about it. What is not right and what needs to be changed. And they have the courage to speak up and demand action.
Yeah, I would say similar things to both Emily and Charo, that especially for white folks, is to do your own work. Do not lean on folks of color for answers or for guidance or to tell you what to do when it comes to racial equity. I think that we got our own work to do. So we can't do work for you. Like, sorry, I'm just putting that out. I'm very explicitly like, we're healing as well, right? And if we're going to be in this together, and we don't want to go through the fight, even though it's kind of like that, like we're talking here, we want to lead with love, right? So allow for that space to happen for folks of color, and just think more deeply on that for yourselves. And I would also offer that, yes, I think, I don't know if it was one of these sessions or another session, but love and action, right? I think I attended something like, so this is love as the movement, but then love and action, right? So that's, I think, for white folks, the next step. And to do this from a place of, and because I see this a lot, a place of, I'm going to fix things, or I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix problems, or, I know what's better for you and you need to adopt this way of doing things, or something to that extent. That's not helpful. And I think that listening is required. I think a lot of listening is definitely required. I think that, so for me, by nature, I am a listener and an observer, probably like Charo. We're both introverts, and and so I really like to take in and process, right? I'm kind of one of those people, and I think that that's really needed, and I think that's a very tangible step that most people can do, right? Is just to lean back and listen, and reflect and do your own work. And I think the other point that I wanted to kind of talk about earlier, or just mention, is that this is also work. So when it comes to racial justice, this is not something that folks of color created, right? We did not create racism and racial, and injustice and systemic, systems of oppression, right? So white folks have to help in undoing that. So yeah, but I guess I'll try to end with a little bit more love. Sorry, I kind of went down a little bit of a hole there, but I think, I think if we do, this is hard work. It is hard work for all of us, and I recognize that, and we're all in very different places, and you need, and I think that recognizing where you are in this moment is where, is what you have to look at, and then do what you can do from this moment, from where you're at.
Germaine, I recognize we're tight on time, but there is a question
in
the chat that is specifically for you. Someone writes, if we're trying to dissect any systemic racism in our organizations, can we ask POC or employees for their input, not to do the work for us, but to make sure we are not acting on untrue assumptions the person is struggling with, not burdening, but also not doing the things that only they feel are right? Can you take like 90 seconds and respond to that? Or maybe put it in the chat if it takes more.
Oh, yeah. I would say, oh, I see it right here, over blah, 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 blah. So, I would say, sorry, I'm just rereading the question again. You know, I've known so many folks of color who have been tasked with being the DEI person, right, within their organization or committee. Like they're not even asked, right? They are just kind of appointed most of the time. And which is definitely an assumption that that person should lead that work in the organization. But so I'm going to point back again to, you know, to racial trauma and healing. It is also really triggering, I think, for folks who don't want to be in that space. They don't want to be a DEI educator or leader within the organization. So you definitely, I'm saying that to say that, you know, to recognize that approach is more harmful than obviously than healing. Actually, it can create more trauma. But the question is, if we're trying to dissect any system, can we ask PLD plays for their input? Oh, okay. So, sorry, I had to reread the question again. I think, and maybe you can talk to this a little bit more as well, Yodit, but I think, I mean, so I can only really speak for myself and for my own personal experience, but I would be okay if an employer approached me, you know, to say, hey, we're looking at these things and, you know, we just want your input. I mean, personally, I would be okay with that, but I think you have to be really careful. I think there's a lot of factors in there, probably too much to go through here. I mean, that could be its own session in and of itself, right? That
I'll help you out there, Germaine, quickly before we transition. I think that I'm hearing this a lot, that white brothers and sisters are like, wait, you know, first you say, take the lead of, you know, follow folks of color, be charged by what they ask you to do, but then you say, do our own work, you know, don't, and I want to just be mindful that we're assuming an either or approach, another cultural norm. And what I believe is that the revolution is rooted in relationships, and that perhaps what you are saying is, you know, before you ask me to lead your DEI effort, do you see me? Do you know what my experiences are? Have we developed a rapport? You know, can you acknowledge the ways in which leading in that work might be traumatic for me? That's love, right? Love is not tasking, was the word you used, not tasking someone, but saying, I want to, and the person who asked this question is good for doing this, I want to check in. You know, I care about, as best we can, moving in justice and liberation work in a way that honors, you know, the past and helps us shape the future. So here's what I've done, right? Or here's what I'm thinking. That's a different tone than, you know, this kind of tasking and such. And I'm here for all of that. And I see some heads nodding, and I think others are. But historically, it's been, oh, you know, I'm not a racist, right? My grandparents weren't, you know, we didn't have slaves, and that's the stuff that shuts us down. That's not love. That's defensiveness.
Thank you, Yodit. And Germaine, thank you for moving us into the space that I think we want to be in for this last part of our session, which is really listening and reveling together in what the three of you have stirred up in this space. And so what we're going to do is we're going to shift now into kind of a community reflection or visioning exercise. And how this will work is, oops. Okay, so here are a few phrases that you may recognized from today's conversation. And the idea for this exercise came out of our planning conversations, where at the very end, after Germaine and Ebony and Charo had shared, Yodit offered this question: what would we be? What would we be if there were no oppression, or if we remembered that there is abundance in the universe? So this exercise is inspired by that moment, and we'll invite you in just a moment to make yourself comfortable, maybe find a piece of paper and something to write with. We'll turn on a little bit of music, and we'll ask you to just find one or two of these prompts that speaks to you from today's conversation, and just write the thing that you feel you need to write in this moment. And then when you're ready, we'll ask you to put that phrase in the chat, and Yodit and I will read those out. So does that make sense? Okay. So whenever you're ready, and I'm gonna play some music as well. So Desiree says, abundance looks like lying in a field of dandelions, feeling the sun on my face, watching the cloud shapes float by, and knowing my lungs are full of fresh air.
Loving myself as my neighbor, loving my neighbor as myself means treating them as they want to be treated.
Putting back into the soil means to plant the seeds of kindness and love in the hearts of children, and pay kindness forward as it was shown to you in others.
When I see you as my beloved, you are a part of me, a member of my family and my heart.
Putting back into the soil means working with intention, holding the importance of what is needed now with what is needed for the future, nurturing, cultivating, preparing with love what will be needed as we grow.
When I see you as my beloved, I can see the joy and the pain in myself from a place of love.
Taking care of each other looks like reaching out just 'cause.
Abundance is a field of beautiful wildflowers.
Our intangible threads of connection are palpably felt through our collective love.
Abundance looks like abandoning the scarcity mindset. Nurturing each other's spirits feels like honoring one another's needs and igniting agency.
For our children's grandchildren, I imagine the opportunity to just be people with no explanation of who or why.
Not letting each other stay broken, tending the grandmother, healing the mother, so that every breath of that baby can be valued and cherished.
Walking hand in hand means respecting you and not rushing to fix it.
Returning to my wholeness feels like trusting my heart's compass to drive me toward love and compassion.
Abundance looks like Charo's apple tree with children, men, and women of all colors gathering the apples, cooking together, eating, and celebrating together.
Loving my neighbor as myself means forgiving them for their hurt, accepting their imperfections as perfect, and allowing them to grow and become.
Abundance of relationship creates the abundance that blooms for everyone.
Liberation feels like freedom to be authentically me.
Liberation sounds like, I can't do this alone. I need your help. Mm.
Returning to my wholeness feels like the little girl in me and all our inner children running free.
Abundance looks like loving someone else without expectation of return and without accepting mistreatment as okay.
Taking care of one another looks like dancing together in a magic circle under a loving rainbow light.
For our children's grandchildren, I want them to feel calm and warmed when they wake because they feel love, because they feel so deeply loved. They feel that deep love that comes from generations teaching the next to let go of pain, to heal, atone, and repair and love back. Love in their DNA instead of trauma.
Returning to my wholeness means letting my body heal before I try to do more, so that I can go forward in fullness and joy and not exhaustion.
So please keep them coming as you feel moved. And in these last few minutes that we have together, for those who are still here, we also invite you, if there's something you feel moved to say or share or ask, please do.
You're welcome, Betsy. Thank you. Walking hand in hand looks like entwined fingers. I can't see where you end and I begin.
For our children's grandchildren, I imagine a world where we've left behind the idea that possibility is like a pie, where everyone is fighting for their peace and instead have embraced the limitlessness of what is possible.
Yes. Thank you, Lisa.
And I'm slipping in the chat our wonderful session feedback request form. So if you have a moment before you go, we would really appreciate hearing about your experience of this session.
And then someone wrote, returning to my wholeness feels like fully stepping into my power as a magician and manifester of a world that I have not yet experienced, and believing it is possible and working diligently and with joy toward it. I know, Etta.
I'm just excited to like do magic.
I know. Like go home and whip up some potions tonight. Yes, yes. Sprinkle me, baby.
What else? I know that there are those of you who are like me and still writing.
Nanya, do you want to drop your email just in case if people have a thought after we get off that they want to share? Does anyone have a follow-up question for our panelists, our wonderful conversationalists, not even panelists, y'all are so much more than that.
Or you can thank them with your voice.
Yes, you can.
Hi, Belinda.
Belinda. I love seeing your face, Belinda.
Me too.
Oh, someone wanted to know what motivates y'all. Tell that story in 3 minutes.
Well, LV, without kind of knowing specifically, but I think for me, I always go back to legacy. I always go back to my children. Doing this and other things for them, so that when I pass the baton, that they have. Again, that they don't have what I have. They're not carrying what I have. So, what motivates me is seeing their faces every day and knowing that they too in a few more years will be adults, and hoping that they will be productive citizens with a fight that they are have passion for, and so yeah, that's in a small nutshell, I would say that's what motivates me.
I was going to say what motivates me is the children. To do my own work so that my children don't inherit my baggage or my family's baggage. And for the ones that are related to me, but for children in general, it's like we have to do this work for them to have a better world and to learn how to do this by watching us so they keep doing it after we're long gone.
Yeah, I would agree with Ebony and Charo. It's for the future, right? For the future generations upon generations, so that the suffering, I think we all talked about, is to continue lightening, right? Lightening the load, lightening the suffering, and have a more healing, loving world. I mean, that's what motivates me. It's just simple. It's just really, it's just love. I should actually show you a picture of how I view myself. Hang on one second. Created this in Leadership Jelly.
Wow.
So that's my superpower, is I'm just like spreading love. So
You are.
anyway, I do not have artistic skill, obviously.
I think it was Eileen who said in the chat that love is moving here. So thank you all for being a part of this. And we wish you a wonderful rest of your day.